Australia's first professional Instagrammer.
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 Lauren, you've been described and given the title of Australia's first professional Instagrammer. Take us back to before.
I was a career chef. I had dropped out of university because I was so passionate about cooking. During that time, probably 2 to 3 years into that journey, I got my first iPhone and discovered an app called Instagram. And all of a sudden I had like 200,000 followers on Instagram.
You've got high stress hormones. You're feeling high strung. You're doing all of the business side. You're trying to be creative. How are you holding it all together?
Do you know, I would get to the end of every year and I would be so stressed out that I would think I was going to have a heart attack. One of the other influencers that I used to work with, he said to me, you know, I used to get on a plane and there'd be some turbulence and I would just sit there and feel the plane and think like, if I died, that would be okay. At least I could rest. And I listened to this response and I was like, that's how I used to feel. And the plane would start rocking and I would think like, if I died, I'd be okay with that because I'm so fucking exhausted. That's how I coped.
Lauren, you've been described and given the title of Australia's first professional Instagrammer. Take us back to before that was given to you.
I was a career chef. I had dropped out of university in my early 20s because I was so passionate about cooking, and I'd worked my way up in that industry without a qualification, just begging chefs to hire me in kitchens all through North Queensland, and just really loving that lifestyle, you know, being a little bit of a fringe dweller naturally. It wasn't until I split with my ex-partner up in Cairns and moved back to the Gold Coast that I, for the first time in my life, took a job in a kitchen that was just super cruisy. I wasn't trying to be a Michelin star chef. I wasn't trying to further my career. I just took something that was super easy down the road, no responsibility, and started working in that Italian restaurant. During that time, probably 2 to 3 years into that journey, I got my first iPhone and discovered an app called Instagram, which immediately captured my attention because it was just such a fun thing to run around with your iPhone and take fun pictures and chat to people. You know, I was quite a social person and quite extroverted, and so I used my little iPhone 4 to take pictures and have these conversations, and before long I found my audience starting to grow, and it was quite, you know, crazy. Like, there was no platform like that out there. It was quite early days of social media. I had never done anything like that before. I'd never put myself on the internet. The internet was still relatively new for me. You know, I didn't have my first smartphone until my late 20s. And all of a sudden I had like 200,000 followers on Instagram. So weird. Around that time, it was becoming pretty clear to me that going out to take pictures at sunrise and being on Instagram was like way more enticing than going to an Italian restaurant and rolling out pizza bases and, you know, grilling zucchinis. And the opportunity came, well, I created the opportunity realistically to quit my job to sort of see if anything could happen out of Instagram. And at that point I had been, you know, contacted by a few different companies. I'd gotten some free sunglasses and a free watch, and I'd been to Hamilton Island. So a few little cool things were happening. I'd never been paid for anything, but I had, you know, a little inkling that something could happen. And so I made the decision to quit my job and just see what would happen. Like, if I could spend all my time taking pictures and going on Instagram and having these conversations, what would happen? And, you know, it's quite easy now to be flippant about it. This is going back 14 years almost. But at the time it was like the hardest, scariest, most confronting thing I'd ever done. I'd never been without a job. And yet I did it anyway. I sat down with my boss. I had the conversation. He tried to convince me to stay. I said no. And about an hour later, I went for a bathroom break and I checked my emails, and I had 3 opportunities sitting in my inbox that had come through during the time I was having that conversation, all for paid travel opportunities. And I was like, that's my sign. Like, this is the right choice. The universe is giving me all of the signs that I need to pursue this. So, I finished up my job. I did a couple of months' notice and started just randomly reaching out to tourism boards and asking them to pay me to Instagram their destination. Super random. Most of them laughed at me. But within about 6 months, it was actually a viable business. Like, it was happening.
Yep.
And about 2 years after that, news.com.au did that featured piece called Australia's First Professional Instagrammer, where I was given that claim, and I still continue to proudly, obviously the social media landscape has changed so much and there's so many influencers. But back then, like, that was a really big deal. And I was very proud of that. And I went on to do hundreds of campaigns with tourism boards and brands and just things that you would never imagine. My life got so big, going from this really small industry where I just thought I'll be a chef for the rest of my life and save up and have a holiday here and there. Like, my life seemed quite mapped out and quite small, and this is just what it's going to be, to just opening, just expanding. I never knew what was going to come into my email next. Like, where am I going to Bhutan? Am I going to work with the orangutans? Like, so many cool opportunities. And then I started creating my own opportunities and ended up running events and ended up doing tours in Zimbabwe. I wrote a photography course and just kind of said yes to everything and saw where it took me. So really, really exciting times, and yeah, kind of set me up for a very different sort of life than the one that I expected I would have.
You've gone from one creative career, stepped out, gone to another creative career, built a big business that, quite frankly, is the dream of, like, photographers, bloggers. I also know that mum bloggers, that's what they want to do. They want to be able to get paid and go to travel. Why stop it?
Good question. I got pregnant. To be completely honest, I had no idea that I would stop traveling like that. I did know that I was going to try for a baby, but I'd never really wanted children. And I already knew that if I couldn't fall pregnant, it would just be like, okay, that's just not meant to be for me. So funny side story, I'd talked to my partner, now my husband, and we'd decided, I'll go off the pill at this time and we'll start trying. And then I had the opportunity to go to Antarctica. And I was like, sorry, babes, we'll put that off for another 6 months because I'm definitely going to Antarctica. So I actually went off the pill in Antarctica, and I fell pregnant 3 months later on my first tours to Zimbabwe. So it's really interesting now, like, looking back on that time. As soon as I fell pregnant and I knew I was going to become a mother, already the stories, the beliefs that I had around motherhood and sacrifice and hard work, like everything, all this stuff, like, bubbled up to the surface for me unconsciously. Like, I didn't know, but I was starting to think, okay, well, I might not be able to travel, and what could I do instead? And, like, already this, like, heart-filled, like, soul-led career was becoming pragmatic, logical. Like, okay, what can I do? What decision can I make? And so I did decide to go full in on my events business. Just in the interim, I thought I'll bounce back to travel pretty soon. Obviously, you don't know what sort of a child you're going to have and whether travel will be possible. I didn't know what it was going to be like to be a mother. So I had a lot of unknowns. And I thought, in the meantime, while I'm figuring all that stuff out, I know that I'll have money coming in, my business will be continuing. And it was a part of my business that I was, also very, very passionate about and I loved. So I had already made that decision, and that event business was going quite well. We had a new event coming up. Early ticket sales were going exceptionally well. I had my baby. I kept working. I was working the day after I had my child, like in labour, and also the day after. And, 1 month after I had her, COVID. So obviously travel industry was, like, super, super heavily impacted.
That was down the toilet.
Yeah.
The honest truth of it is,
Yeah.
like, that's what realistically happened.
Yeah, it really did.
Before we take this story further, I want to explore what it was like in the world of travel photography and, living the life of an influencer. Because at the time, I think you had around 400,000 followers through Instagram. It's you know, you're flying to all these destinations, you're going to Antarctica with orangutans. Like I said before, this is the dream life for so many people. But behind the scenes of that, what was it actually like?
Good question. There was a lot of good. And certainly in the early years, there was a huge amount of like, pinch me, like, what the fuck is this? How is this my life? And I remember, like, I used to tally up how much money I was making and be like, that would be X amount of weeks as a chef. I've just made that in a day. Like, so it's, yeah, like definitely everything kind of had opened up in my mind as to what was possible. But over time, I, you know, again, like looking back now and understanding myself a lot better, I had a lot of scarcity back then. I didn't know if it could be taken from me or when it would be taken from me or if things would change. And so I said yes to everything. I had a real fear of missing out. And I was also quite addicted to stress hormones and had spent like most of my life as a chef, you know, not surprising, in fight or flight. And so it was really familiar to me to be quite stressed and under the pump all the time. So I took this really beautiful, amazing gift that I'd been given and I just took too much of it right from the get-go. But especially as my career started to really take off and I had like more opportunities coming in than I could physically fit into my calendar. And I remember like squeezing, I would email a client and be like, can you just move it forward 2 days? And then I'd squeeze something in the middle, and it would be quite common to go from one job directly to another without even stopping at home, or I'd come from an international job and be at home for 12 hours and then back on another plane to another international job. And frankly, it became incredibly stressful. And I got to a point where I was on a plane to Finland and I was just thinking, oh, I don't want to go to Finland today. Like literally, I can remember feeling, I don't want to go to Finland today. What?
It just doesn't comprehend in the brain. You don't want to go to Finland. Like, what the hell is wrong with you?
It felt incredibly ungracious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. It was not, it didn't feel aligned for me. I didn't like the way that it made me feel. I didn't like that lack of gratitude because a couple of short years earlier, I was like, pinch me, I'm going to Logan. I'm getting paid. You know, for those listening who don't know where Logan is, it's a suburb outside of Brisbane, which is a city in Australia. I mean, it's not Finland.
Yeah. Let's just describe it nicely and say it's not the most glamorous place in the world.
It's not the most glamorous place in the world. And I had a really great time. Like I went to all of these places and it was also new and exciting to me. And fast forward a couple of years and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go to Finland. Like, yeah, it didn't feel good. And, you know, the business of running a business, yes, I was out taking pictures and popping them up on Instagram, but I was also writing reports and sending invoices and balancing my bank and working with my accountant and, you know, responding to client inquiries. And there was like a huge amount of admin that went on the side of that job. And I had given myself no time whatsoever to do it. So it had to be done when I was on the ground. Like I would be in Finland spending the middle part of the day doing the important work that also had to be done to keep that business viable, rather than actually sitting there and sinking into gratitude and thinking, I'm in Finland. Yeah. So there's also, I guess, like the interesting part around when you take your passion, and photography for me was such a passion. You know, I would wake up early and run out for sunrise before my shift work and, you know, just love it. I'd run tired, which I hated being tired back then. You know, I was an 8-hour night of sleep girl, but I would sacrifice on that because I just wanted to have my camera in my hand and be doing that.
So it's interesting that you say this, because this is kind of a trap that we creatives fall into. We love producing video, creating images, you know, recording podcasts like we're doing right now. We love to do that, but we never get taught how to run a business. And so you've highlighted this perfectly. What I really want to understand is that Lauren that was passionate, joyful, excited, you know, running out at sunrise and sunset. I remember young Ryan doing that too. Did she lose the passion?
Yeah. Like, it's not that I lost the passion per se. It's that my creativity could not be switched on 24/7. And I had created a life where my livelihood depended on it being switched on 24/7. you know, my client in Finland did not care if I was having a bad day. They wanted beautiful photographs, and they wanted my Instagram followers to give those photographs lots of likes. So not only was it tied up in creativity and my ability to create beautiful images, but given that it was influencer marketing as well, it was also like really reliant on the likes and the comments and the people that would go through and follow the client I was working with. And those metrics were completely unpredictable. You know, the platform was changing, the algorithms were changing. Sometimes I'd have a really good trip, or the destination would be something classically beautiful, you know, sunrises in the Rockies.
Yep.
And other times it would be a little bit more challenging to capture the sort of images that I knew would get that sort of attention. And with the algorithm, again, continuing to change, if you don't get the engagement early on in the piece when you post, it just kind of falls off. So, yeah, there was a lot of pressure to perform and no space to just recalibrate and find that spark and find that creativity again. So it's not that the passion went away. Like, certainly I could be sitting on a plane saying, oh, Finland, but, you know, 2 days later be under the Northern Lights. Like, literally, like, I can't even describe that feeling.
It's hard to find that, like, uninspiring.
Yeah, like, literally, like, oh, you know, go from questioning your entire life's choices through to, like, there's nowhere in the world I'm meant to be. So the highs and lows were quite extreme. The passion was still there, but the pressure was definitely there. And it really impacted the way that I felt in the day-to-day.
And so while you're on location, I know there's a story here, and I'm going to lead you to it. Tell me about the very tight deadline that you had and what you had to choose between.
I know where you're going with this.
Now, I don't think you've ever revealed this answer publicly. I know the answer, and that's why I want to get it out of you. But
you know, as much as I would try to educate my clients on the fact that I needed space to create not just images but stories, sometimes I would get into a destination and the itinerary would be crazy, like hectic. And especially destinations, I think that we're used to working with journalists where, you know, you want the journalists to experience as much as possible so that they could find their story angles and they could write various pieces for different publications. But yeah, occasionally I'd get one of these itineraries and it would be really tight, like between sunrise and having to be at an early activity and meals and everything that was squeezed in. I would remember, and there were specific incidents, but coming back to my room after a sunrise shoot and knowing I have to be out the door again in 10 minutes. Like, do I repack my bag, send an email, have a shower, or go to the toilet? What do I choose? Like, I would have to make choices like that all the time. And I would sometimes not go to the toilet and do a poo because my client was expecting me in the lobby in 10 minutes' time. And that's, you know, the ultimate denial of self and needs and, like, wrapped up in a lot of people pleasing. And it's okay to be a few minutes late. You know, it's also, I used to really try to communicate my needs. I even had, I did like this 10-page PDF at one point, like working with Lauren. And I would outline all of these things. Yep. And, you know, a lot of clients would be like, wow, this is such a great resource. Like, thanks for explaining the process to us and helping us understand what it takes for you to be in your creative genius. But most of them would just, I guess, like, not even open it. Like, this is overwhelming. 10 pages. Like,
10 pages. I don't have time for that. Who cares? She's just there to do a job.
Yeah, dig out the itinerary from the last journalists that came through. So, yeah, I would try to communicate my needs, but I guess I didn't have good boundaries at the time, and I would want to please my client. And so I would just do what needed to be done to keep them happy and try to keep churning out those little squares.
Yep. You've mentioned boundaries. Tell me about what you ended up doing, apart from the 10-page PDF, because I think any creative that's been in their business for more than probably 3 years has gone, oh my God, I need one of those documents. I need, to tell people how to actually work with me properly. Tell me what you did to actually set boundaries with clients so that you're not crashing yourself all the time.
If I'm to be completely honest about my influencer career, I don't think I did anything. I think that I created the document, that is something, and I would give them the document and often like revise the itinerary and make suggestions. But what would happen more often than not if I did get onto a trip that was not conducive to creativity is I would just spend the trip being incredibly pissed off, like incredibly pissed off, ranting about it. You know, this happened in a number of destinations. I don't really want to shame and sort of name names, but there were a couple in particular. You know, at one point I remember calling my now husband, you know, calling Dreamboat and just crying and saying, what have I done with my life? And I was in a tropical island paradise at the time. Again, like, it didn't make me feel good to be feeling that way. It felt incredibly ungrateful. I would generally give feedback to the client, but even the way I delivered that feedback was coming from like a really pissy, ungrateful place. Rather than just being just very clear and honest. Like, my communication style was not very good back then. And I'm sure it definitely affected relationships. I'm sure there's a handful of people out there in PR land who were like, oh, we won't work with Lauren again because that was, that was not what we expected as far as like, feedback on this wonderful opportunity that we gave her. There's, you know, definitely a lot more clients that absolutely loved me. I had a lot of repeat clients, but towards the end, it was a lot more common for me to feel pissed off and that somebody had overstepped my boundaries, even though I didn't even know what they were and I hadn't communicated them. It was an interesting time.
So with that, you're on a tropical island, you're pissed off at the world, you're pissed off at the client.
Oh, yeah.
You're forced to be creative at that point. How are you actually feeling in those moments, standing on a beach, watching a sunset, going, why the fuck do I have to be here?
Too much pressure. Yeah. And my photographs would always suffer on trips like that. Yeah, that tropical island trip in particular, I had sent some influencers to that very destination a couple of years previously, and they had a completely different itinerary, and their shots were some of the best images I've ever seen. And all I wanted to do was get back and like revisit those places and have the same experience that had. And I was given a completely different itinerary that was very questionable, and I was nowhere near like these sorts of locations. And I just felt lack. I felt like I'd been ripped off. And I also felt just angry that the client would make that choice. Like, here you are bringing in a bigger influencer at greater cost to you, and you're not giving me the conditions that I need to create beautiful images, like not just with the locations, but also with making me feel good and catering to my creative needs, which I had communicated. So, yeah, it was, I don't know, it was a lot of grey area. And looking back, like, I think the person that I am now, I would have found the silver lining and I would have found beauty in those moments regardless, because I'm a very different person. Yeah. But back then, it just felt horrible. The feelings in my body and my mind, the emotional states that I would get in, the lows that I would get in, where I'm calling my partner and saying, like, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, not a good place.
Yeah, when you know you want to quit traveling the world.
Getting paid to Instagram the world. Yeah.
You know you're in a pretty bad place.
Agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the person you are now would have found the silver lining. But I want to talk about the person back then. You've mentioned you're addicted to stress hormones. You're high strung. Like, that's probably the bluntest way to put it. Just you and I know each other quite well, so I feel like I can say that.
Go there.
Yeah, you've got high stress hormones. You're feeling high strung. You're doing all of the business side. You're trying to be creative. How are you holding it all together?
Oof. Do you know, I would get to the end of every year and I would be so stressed out that I would think I was going to have a heart attack. Like, I would be like, I would limp to the finish line each year, like, I've made it. Now I can have a couple of weeks off for Christmas. Yeah, I was incredibly, incredibly, incredibly stressed. I was not dealing with it. And I kept thinking, like, this will reach a breaking point. And it's actually really interesting. One of the other influencers that I used to work with back then, Jared Sang, who's doing incredibly well for himself, he's continued down the road with photography and videography. We interviewed him for a podcast, not a podcast, it was a recorded interview a number of years back for our event business. And he said to me, you know, I used to get on a plane and there'd be some turbulence, and I would just sit there and feel the plane and think like, if I died, that would be okay. At least I could rest. And I listened to this response and I was like, that's how I used to feel. That's how I used to feel. I would be on a plane over God knows where, I was catching over 100 flights a year back then, and the plane would start rocking and I would think like, if I died, I'd be okay with that because I'm so fucking exhausted. Mm-hmm. That's how I coped. So not overly healthy.
No, it's a very unhealthy approach, but also one that's not singular to you. There's this phenomenon with working mums where they want to go to hospital just so they can have a break.
Yeah.
Like they want something to go wrong just so they can rest. And so I know you're not alone because I felt that as well. Not dying. I don't want to die.
I don't think I wanted to die, but yeah.
I'd be happy if I just got to, like, I don't know, if I broke a leg, I wouldn't care because then I got to take a break.
Yeah.
And it gets to that point. So you're not the only one, and obviously Jared as well.
I don't know how he's doing now. I should check in. Still feel like dying when you're when you're up in
Next
the air,
time you're on a
Jared?
plane, you feel like dying. Yeah, maybe don't record that conversation. So going through all these emotions, feeling like getting to that point, you know you're in burnout. That creative spark is down to basically just a gaslighter at the moment. Tell me about the breaking point. You mentioned before you think that this breaking point's coming. What was it?
I have had a couple of breaking points, to be really honest with you. One of them happened in 2018. I was interviewed for a podcast. Podcast might be a bit of a catalyst for me, by an Australian entrepreneur called Kerwin Ray. And his work was all around, doing business in a way that's not stressful. And I guess I just came across him at the right time in my life to be looking for solutions and answers to why I was feeling this way and how I could not feel this way. After being on his podcast, he invited me to a 3-day transformational event, which I attended not that long afterwards at the end of that year. And it was the first time I'd heard anybody talk about personal development, talk about the ego, talk about burning out and business owners needing to or feeling like they need to do it all themselves. And it just opened my eyes. I felt seen for the first time in business. And I did implement a lot of changes. Like I felt so motivated after that event. I did 3 days and I was like, whoa, I'm going to change my life. Started doing affirmations every day and started doing a handstand against the wall every day. And I started practicing yoga and just doing a whole bunch of random things. I also committed to saying no to a lot of opportunities coming in to give myself bandwidth. And I was booked out months in advance. So I needed to start saying no now, right?
Yep.
So that in 6 months' time I'd have a little bit of space
room
and time.
to breathe.
Yeah, room to breathe. And not long after that, I met somebody else who went on to become a very important figure in my life, and she is still in my life, and that's Kate Rich. I met Kate at a yoga retreat. I would not have even been at this yoga thing if it weren't for the Kerwin Ray event. So synchronicities, right? And Kate ended up becoming a business coach of myself and my other 2 business partners at the time. So I guess the first breaking point was going to the 3-day event and being like, things have got to change. I feel really seen. Implementing a few changes, but still, any exposure to personal development, the first time you're exposed to it, for me at least, and I think for a lot of people, it's all very logical, like the brain's just trying to make sense of it. Yeah. And then maybe less than a year after that, with Kate as our coach, through this series of random synchronicities, I was in Queenstown. The girls and I were getting coached by Kate. We were doing an exercise called the overwhelm cycle, where you sort of map out all of your overwhelm. And I was still deeply in influencer land at this point. I wasn't pregnant yet, although the conversation was happening. And I was working with these 2 business partners on the events business that I later went on to scale when I fell pregnant. So we were doing this exercise called the overwhelm cycle, and the girls were starting it. And it's basically like, talk us through what happens when you start to get overwhelmed in life. And I was like, I don't get overwhelmed. Like, what? what is this even about? Like, I don't know how to answer this because I just feel good all the time and I just get it done. So the girls went before me, and the stuff that was coming out of their mouth, I was like, woof, you guys, like, you got to sort your shit out. This is like no joke. And then it came to my turn, and, Kate is an excellent coach still to this day, and she just knows how to listen and dig, similar to somebody else that I'm talking to right now. And, she just started digging, and we kind of got to the idea that actually, yes, I do on occasion get somewhat overwhelmed with what I'm doing in life. And when I recognize that it is a cycle, and I can go from periods of feeling really invincible and I can take on anything and give me more and jam in my schedule, and periods of like, I don't even want to get out of bed, like turbulence, take me to my death. That was the first time I'd actually felt it. You know, it wasn't just an analytical, oh, we have an ego and a voice in our head. Like, it was, I felt it.
Can you describe that feeling for me?
Kate kind of prodded me a little bit more. She said, are you happy to go? You know, are you happy to go along with this? She invited me to have a tantrum. Super random. But I did. I was tearing up paper and like ranting about random shit, still feeling like I wasn't fully in the tantrum. I still felt self-conscious in it because, you know, this is quite high gradient for where I was at. Like, to go from I never feel overwhelmed to having a tantrum in front of my 2 business partners and this random coach. But during the tantrum, I just had this overwhelming urge to cry. And I laid down in the fetal position and I said, I want my mummy and I want my daddy. That's what I said. Yeah, I felt very alone and fucking tired.
Yeah.
Yeah, really tired.
Was this the first time you felt loneliness?
It's the first time I'd acknowledged that I felt loneliness, yeah.
Because it is a lonely space, the creative industry.
Yeah.
There's collaboration is a great thing, but the loneliness is debilitating sometimes.
And even when we collaborate, we often don't let people in.
No.
You know, I had not let my business partners in at that point.
No. There's nobody that would have a conversation like this generally in the creative industry unless one person is open and willing to start the conversation. Once you first let the loneliness out and acknowledged it, what did you do next? What was the next step?
The excellent timing of that was that all of those no's that I had started to give were coming to fruition and my schedule was quite light. I remember, you know, I had another big awakening during that very same trip with one of my business partners, and it was like a veil had been lifted and I started to see the world a little bit more like how it was, not this toxic positivity. Everything's okay, la 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 la, I'm fine. So I had another big breakthrough that came about through an argument. And yeah, I remember I left that trip on the plane from Queenstown, and I'd been suffering from quite bad lower back pain for most of my life, but in particular the last 5 years, especially while I've been traveling and on planes a lot, like really, really, really bad lower back pain. And a few months prior, I guess around the time that I was starting to feel a little bit more sense of space in my life and feel a bit more intentional about I want to change, I had started getting massage and being more specific, like where is this pain in my body? And I'd narrowed it down. It was the size of a 50-cent piece. I knew exactly where it was, which side of my spine. And my massage guy was starting to work on it more. And like, I didn't even know that you're not supposed to have that much pain. Like, he would massage me and I would be writhing, but I wouldn't tell him. Like, he didn't even know. And I was like, so is massage supposed to make me feel like I want to vomit? Like, no, most people do not have that experience. That pain like came to such a peak on the plane. And I thought to a couple of relationships of mine that had recently gone south with women, which is a cycle that I'd carried through my life. And I ended up reaching out to those women and saying some things that needed to be said and sharing some more of my soft and vulnerable side with them. And when I got home that night, I had a massage booked the following day. And when my massage therapist, poor Ian, got his elbow into that spot, the pain was gone. The pain, I had a physical release of pain from my body, a 50-cent piece, shaped and sized piece of pain from my lower back from that one moment of vulnerability, that one breakthrough. And so I got home, I had that weird experience. I still actually have a little video clip that I recorded to send to the girls to be like, you won't believe what's happened. And I basically spent the next 3 months crying and doing yoga. Yeah. Crying and doing yoga and journaling. Yeah, it was the first time I'd really given myself permission to take some space to get to know myself. And it was really nice. And I remember saying at the time, like, you need this space. Never forget, like, always make space for this, because when you slow down, eventually you'll speed up, and it feels better. And of course, that's not where the story ends, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
We will. There's something that I want to ask you first. Through this process, was it the first time that you'd actually acknowledged your own mental health as a creator?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, we started that overwhelm cycle. I started that exercise thinking I was totally fine. And my event at the time was called the Travel Boot Camp. And I remember we were doing a panel Q&A at one point with my 2 business partners, and someone in the audience was like, how do you manage your mental health, like, with all of this and creativity? Similar sort of conversation to this. And Liz and Georgia, my business partners at the time, they answered and gave like really beautiful balanced answers and good like usable tools. And then they were like, oh, Lauren will have a different answer. And I was like, what? Like, you just get on with things and you just do it. And like, yes, no problem. What mental health? Like, it's all good. Yeah.
I don't have mental health. I don't need to acknowledge that. That
is where I started that day. And as I said, I ended the day in the fetal position crying for my parents. So, yeah, that was the first time I realised, like, it's not all hunky-dory in Lauren Land. Yeah,
Lauren Land changed a lot through that period.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. So what happened next?
The interesting thing about that period of time where I was crying and doing yoga was that it preceded my decision to get pregnant. And it was pretty close to that time, like on the timeline, it's quite close to that. And I really don't believe that I would have gotten pregnant if I hadn't done that work on myself. I just don't think it would have happened for me. So that shedding and that realization that I needed to look at those parts of myself and I needed to slow down, I think those were the contributing factors, that actually helped me go down that path of motherhood. So we were working with Kate as a coach. I had 2 business partners, Liz and Georgia. The COVID had hit, not quite, had the baby, COVID hit, we were scaling the business. And during all of that, obviously we talked about travel going down the bin, and events, obviously went down the bin as well.
Both businesses.
But luckily, we turned it all around and went virtual quite quickly. And I sort of skimmed over the part where Liz exited the business and Kate came on board the business. Like, a whole bunch of stuff happened in the business. We had some restructuring. It's not really important to the narrative. Yeah. But I had Mark here and the pandemic hit, and we made the decision quite early to take the business virtual, and it went absolutely gangbusters. Mm-hmm. We had our first virtual travel boot camp. We did an upsell off the back of that, which netted us $600,000, which was just an insane amount of money. Like, I was earning, at the peak of my influencer days, my business was probably turning over about $400,000. A lot of that was expenses and paying other contractors and things like that. But, pretty decent money. Yeah. But to make $600,000 in a weekend, absolutely insane amounts of money. And given that I had a child now, and I had all of these stories in my mind, these subconscious beliefs around what it takes to be a mother and sacrifices. And I was like, it's not the same thing as traveling the world taking pictures. But, it felt purposeful to me to be helping people in that way. Yeah. Travel Boot Camp was all about inspiring people and giving them the tricks and tools on how to get paid to travel. which was becoming somewhat obsolete in the middle of a pandemic. But, you know, at that point, quite early on in the piece, we were still like, this is going to blow over quite quickly. So we did still, you know, have that virtual event and have that upsell and make all of that money. And, you know, I worked really hard in that time as well. All of that free time and space that I'd cleared up for myself before I fell pregnant had now gone. And I was, again, like falling back into this habit of, yeah, like I need to work. And again, unconsciously going back to the stress hormones and the dysregulation and feeling a certain way and not recognising it. Somewhat better, but flavours of the same thing. Yeah, flavours of the same thing.
Because there's patterns emerging here.
Oh, yes. Yes.
For the people watching and listening to this, there are some pretty obvious patterns starting to come to light. To go from the travel photographer, you know, Instagram influencer, to the business owner, and your title then became managing director, this is a very different world, very different experience for a creative person. Describe the transition, because I'm sure there's some people watching this going, oh, I just want to grow the business, I want to scale, I want to get off the tools, I want to go and, you know, get a team. And
so it was an interesting time because we had the travel boot camp and we'd made that $600,000 and we had, you know, a program to deliver, and you would know because you filmed some of the videos. You were there. So we had that business, and given that all three of us were going through our own personal journeys big time, you know, I was a mother by now, travel was becoming obsolete, as I've already mentioned, like we were all like, okay, so if we could just let our imaginations run wild and sit down and like really think about who we want to be in the world and what business we want to grow, like what would we actually be doing? And we had like a number of random ass like strategy sessions in various Airbnbs around the Gold Coast. One in particular, the McMansion, springs to mind. But we basically envisioned a coaching business where we could help business owners to scale their businesses without burning out. You know, basically we all teach what we need to learn, right? So we were deep in that journey ourselves, having not quite found the solutions, but, you know, having found some solutions and doing things differently. And we were like, yeah, that's it. That would be the dream business. If anything were possible, that would be the dream business. And rather than, you know, just continuing with the very successful, well-known and beloved business that we had, we threw that business in the bin and we started a brand new business, which, as you can imagine, is quite stressful.
Yep.
Cycles of stress, you know. other dynamics at play,
what pattern
obviously,
do we
other
see
people.
Here?
It's just, I don't even know. It's so so hard to spot the patterns. We decided to start a brand new business. We had a pretty good business coach at the time. We were doing some masterminding with him. I was given the title of managing director based purely on, you know, skill sets and who has the best organisation to actually get this off the ground. But also at the time we acknowledged that it's not my wheelhouse. It's not what I love. All of us, in fact, had jobs that in the long term we didn't want to have in the business. We used to joke, like, we're the Tony Robbins, the female Tony Robinses of Australia. Three of us, the trio Tony Robbins. We were a little bit delusional, but I think we actually had just enough balls to pull it off. So we all took a role in the business. You know, obviously we were founders, the three of us, and we all had a role in the business as well. And mine was the managing director. And I acknowledged this is not going to creatively fulfill me, and I'm happy to take this sacrifice now to get this business to where it needs to be so that eventually I can enjoy my life again. Yeah, eventually I can enjoy my life again. But interesting side note, I'd also done some personal development around that time. You might remember me talking about it. It was some pretty alternate sort of energetic cleansing work around the chakras. Yep. And one thing that does, it's called the spiral, is it brings you really back into alignment with yourself. So I do feel like the idea behind the business and the way that I worked in the early days, especially the first 6 months of the business when I felt very clear and very aligned with what my purpose on earth was, I was down to working 30 hours a week. I had really good work-life balance. I spent a lot of time just laying in the park on a picnic blanket. You know, I actually felt like, I think I've kind of got this figured out. You know, obviously during my working hours, I was not doing tasks that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
I was good at them. And there was a sense of fulfillment and a sense of this is short term and I'm willing to make this sacrifice. But after a year of that, definitely the shine was starting to wear off. It was like, how much longer? You know, but when will the money be there for us to hire a managing director? Like, when will I not have to do another fucking systems meeting? and all of that important alignment work that I'd done with the spiral, that all started to melt away because I didn't give myself time and space to keep it integrated in my body. And so I did fall back into the same pattern. I fell back into the stress hormones. I fell back into the self-sacrificing, no boundary, people-pleasing, stressful existence that had sort of driven my creative journey my whole life.
So when you got to the end of that business, looking back on it, was the sacrifice worth it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The amount of personal growth that I went through to make that business succeed, I would not be the person that I am today without it. Like, I scaled a team of 12. Like, I was the managing director of 12 people. You know, I learned all about how to build a business. Yes, there were skills that I learned. You know, I learned how to write an org chart and I learned about strategic planning. Like, yeah, those are really important things. But the person that I had to become in order to get out of the scrappy, do everything, you know, that as a business owner, it's such a journey to be able to delegate and lead a team. It's a huge journey. And although that business, ultimately, we closed it down and we didn't continue with it, everything that I learned has now become a part of me. Like, I've leveled up as a human being. I did have a slight existential crisis after that business ended, which I'm sure we're going to get to. But no, I have zero regrets, absolutely none. Like, that was a very, very powerful, transformative time in my life.
Because we were talking off air just before we hit all of the multiple record buttons in this room.
The many cameras, yes.
That during that time, you were in the high stress mode. You were addicted to those stress hormones again. That's what causes burnout from a metaphysical, human chemistry level, with an overdose of those. But the thing that you were lacking, what were you missing in that managing director role?
Creativity. Yeah, creativity. Other people were doing the creative work. Other people were doing the creative work and I was holding the meetings and overseeing the creative work. Yeah, that was hard.
And with that feeling of looking at other people's creative going, no, I can do that, or that could be better, or this could be that. How were you leading that as the person versus the manager? Because there's two different identities here.
We had all decided that we would stick to our lanes in that business. You know, I said my business partners and I all took a role in the business.
Yep.
And although we all had the skills for all of the roles, to be honest, we all agreed, you know, if you take that role, you're in charge. So to be honest, I didn't really entertain. I would have done that differently. I trusted my business partners. I trusted their expertise and I let them do their thing. Even though I had things that I could have added, it would have muddied the waters. You know, we all acknowledged that if we were to grow the business to where we wanted to grow it, we couldn't be over everything. We each had to have our areas. So within the business, that felt very good. It felt right. However, it felt like what we were creating became a little disjointed because we all had the same vision, but slightly different versions of the same vision. And it looked a little bit differently. And it was, you know, we were coming from different lenses and different perspectives. And as a person coming from an extremely exciting, creative, you know, solo journey as an entrepreneur to being, you know, I felt very stuck. I felt trapped. I felt like I was in jail. When I woke up in the morning and opened my calendar and saw 3 hours of meetings in red, I wanted to kill myself. And I just wanted to cancel every one of those fucking meetings and go out and take some pictures at the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're sitting in the plane again.
I'm back on the plane. Take me, turbulence. And, you know, I would, if I reached a really bad point, I would talk to the girls, and overwhelm became, you know, part of our language within the business, given, you know, all the history we had with the overwhelm cycle. And I would say I'm a 10 out of 10. Like, I actually just need to back off today. And we had the freedom to do that. Like, that's what we were growing. We were growing a business that could operate without us. So meetings could be cancelled or somebody else could step in. And I would just go and lay in the bath and have a cry and do what needed to be done and fill my cup for that day. But then all the meetings needed to be rescheduled because the systems did need to be created. And, you know, it just, yeah, it was just all still sitting there waiting for me. So, yeah, as a person, I really just missed freedom. I missed creativity. And I strongly, strongly felt like I had a burning spark inside of me that I still have, that business doesn't have to be that way. You know, the strategic plan, everything that you hear any business person talk about, every entrepreneur, every podcast out there about business, it's all like, you need the strategic plan and you need the data and you need the this and that and the sales. When I hear that, I actually want to fucking kill myself, because I believe there's a different way to do business. And I'm kind of wanting to prove it. Like, that's a big part of my journey now. I think there's, you know, I look at those elements of business, the strategic planning and the data and all of that. I see that as quite like masculine constraints, and I think that they can be really useful in business. But I think that the world would benefit from bringing a lot more femininity and intuition and ease into business, and having business be more of a magnetic, energetic prospect. When I look back at my early days of influencer marketing, Australia's first professional Instagrammer, you know, everything that happened for me was so easy. It came from out of nowhere. Like I said, the universe just delivered. And I believe that's because I was just in my zone of genius, just unapologetically doing my thing. Yes, I burnt out. Like, yes, I brought trauma into that and ruined something really beautiful. But everything that happened initially, that came from a place of such magnetism. Like, that was the universe opening up and rewarding me for being really fucking honest with who I was. I really felt that. And in Phoenix, the business that we're discussing now, I just lost that. I was straight back in, like, we need to have the strategic plan and we must write the org chart and everything needs to fit in its box. And it just didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. And I was dying. I was really dying.
You've mentioned this a couple of times, and this is this conversation of purpose. You said at the beginning of Phoenix, you felt like you had a purpose. You were excited, and then it faded away. You got sick and tired of it. So what was that purpose?
I had articulated my purpose back then, and it was inspiring people to be better for the betterment of the planet. And it's something I kind of stumbled across through travel initially. You know, I was a very deeply small-minded, unconscious person. Like we all start. I thought that the world was only going to be a small place for me. I thought that I would grow up, get a job, have children, buy a house, get married, die.
Preferably not on a plane.
Preferably not on a plane. It had never crossed my mind that there was a greater purpose for me, or that I mattered, or I was important, or I had something significant to contribute to the world. And then this incredible thing happened to me with Instagram, you know, and it feels quite accidental. But what wasn't an accident is that I went with it. I found this beautiful thing that I love to do, and I indulged it. I didn't say you shouldn't. You know, I didn't let logic dictate. I went all in with it. And it was beautiful. And through my travels, my mind started to open. I started to be exposed to like really inspiring stories and meet people that were doing really inspiring things in the world. And I definitely remember feeling back then like quite powerless, like one human in a world with so many problems. And, you know, my mum is a news junkie, and so I was exposed to the news a lot back then. And I used to read online news, and you just see problem, fear, like awful thing, global warming. And I used to always think like, fuck, we're all doomed. Like it's all going up in fire. Like, what are we even here for? And then I started to realize through my travels that people can make a difference, and people are making a difference. There's a lot of really incredible people out there in the world doing really incredible things that are making a difference in their little pocket of the world. And that inspired me so much that I wanted to be one of those people. And that's actually what birthed my tours to Zimbabwe. You know, the travel work as well, you know, I felt purposeful, because I thought if people can just get out of their comfort zone and get overseas and have these experiences, like it might start to broaden their mind, like it's happened for me. And then starting to realize like tourism actually can have a huge impact on local populations as well. So I ran these tours to Zimbabwe, and they felt deeply meaningful, deeply meaningful for me. Like, yeah, I've had a very strong sense, like, this is it. You are on the right path. Like, pursue this path by, you know, at all costs. Like, this is it. You fucking found it. And I got pregnant on that tour. And, you know, the rest is history, as we've been talking about. I knew that there are ways to facilitate people having more awareness, having more consciousness, making better choices, and wanting to do good things in the world, rather than just live these small lives feeling insignificant and feeling powerless and feeling like they're not the masters of their own fucking destiny. Like, I knew that, and I'd created that, and I wanted to help others have that realization. Doing it through the vehicle of a company called Phoenix, where I was the managing director and we helped business owners scale their businesses, you know, that was just a vehicle. But it felt like I could have that impact within that vehicle. It was just too many sacrifices in order to get that message through.
I find that quite interesting, because another interview as part of this series is with Anthony Smith, the head of podcast production or trailer production for the Diary of a CEO and Flight Group, which that's a very worthwhile listen for the people actually listening and watching this, is we actually got onto the topic of purpose with him as well. And he lost his purpose because of logical constraints of things that happened and the consistent sort of pressures that kept building up, and it then made the purpose not worth it to continue at that level. And so he refound his purpose in what he does now, which is incredible, and it's changed the world. Tell me about your purpose now, because you've been through a lot of experience in the last few years. What is it now, and how are you feeling that as a continuing driver to kind of reignite that spark and that flame?
Great question. It's not something that I've put in a little box with a neat bow like before. You know, inspiring people to be better for the betterment of the planet. I don't feel like I need to do that anymore. I too lost my purpose, not just through the sacrifices I made with Phoenix, but when the decision was made to exit that business. I was pregnant with my second child, and I went through a lot of shit for 2 years from that point. Every single pillar of my identity crumbled to the ground. There's no better way to describe it. Some of it was quite circumstantial, and some of it I definitely leaned into. But I guess one of the biggest things that happened for me was that after the decision was made to close the business, I was like, okay, so what's next? What's the next business? Let's get cracking on this next thing. And I did attempt to get a couple of little things off the ground. We reached out to you at the time. We've had a lot of crossover, and nothing seemed to stick. So I had this moment where, you know, money was not tight, to be honest. Like, I had a lot of money saved, and my husband and I had discussed it, and we've said, like, the best use of this money right now is to just live. You know, let's just not worry about spending it. Let's just live and not have to worry about working. So money wasn't tight, but it felt tight. Like energetically, with no money coming in, I felt a huge amount of fear and scarcity. And I was strongly in fight or flight. Like I was in a deep, deep survival. Like all of my money stories, all this shit was coming up from nowhere. Like boom, boom, like fuck, what's happening? This is not stopping. Pregnancy did bring a lot up for me as well. Pregnancy and facing the prospect of having a second child. Like all of a sudden, it's not an accident. Like I don't just have one kid. Like I have a family. What the fuck? Like everything was really real for me. So money stress was there, and my husband wanted to send some money over to his brother who was immigrating to the UK from Zimbabwe. And I had this moment of deep rage, like rage. And rage, like anger, it's such an interesting emotion because it's so easy to project it.
Yeah.
You know, it comes up, the rage was at myself. Like I felt completely powerless over my circumstances. But my projection was like, how fucking dare you ask me? How dare you ask that of me? We're not sending money. We've barely got enough to survive ourselves. Like, if you can call $100,000 barely enough to survive. And I was so angry. And a couple of days later, I was just doing some personal development, which I didn't even end up continuing. It was a course that I was invited to participate in. And the module that I was on was all about personal responsibility. And the coach had said, you know, if you accept personal responsibility, like if you truly believe in this in your heart and soul, what must you believe about yourself to have created the life you're currently in? And I was like, I knew it was deep, but it didn't hit me for 2 days. And 2 days later, it fucking dropped me because I just realized, like, I don't love myself. And I don't think that I deserve love. And I don't think that I even deserve to be on this planet if I'm not working, if I'm not producing, if I'm not earning. Like everything was tied up in that. And I just felt so sick. Like, I'm a mother. I don't want to pass this shit on to my children. And I made the decision. I made it. Like, in that moment, no fucking more. And I made the decision to not work and not be in business and find myself without any of that, to love myself without any of that. And that was a huge turning point for me, And I did spend the next 2 years, almost to the day actually, it's around this time 2 years ago that I made that decision. I closed myself off for money and opportunity. And I just said no until I love myself. I'm not going to do it again. And I've learnt to love myself. And I've built that foundation. I've done a huge amount of personal work. I've created beautiful habits in my life. Like, I don't even recognize who I used to be. I just fucking stopped. I stopped and I said no more. And about 3 weeks ago, I realized that work has been completed and I'm ready to get back out there. That's the journey I've been on.
That's a big journey.
Yeah. And what fucking luxury to have the time to do it.
Yep.
To use that money for something so good. That money that I earned by sacrificing every ounce of my being. But to have that money and say, fuck it, I'm going to use that money to learn to love myself and not have to worry about working and surviving.
It's amazing what happens when you come out the other side, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And through all of this, come out the other side, you're ready to get back to work. I'm sure there's a purpose that sits behind there as well for you now. Just before you share that, now that you love the Lauren that's sitting in front of me right now, what would this Lauren say to young Lauren who started the Instagram business?
It's such a good question. And I don't know, like I feel like these rhetorical situations where you can go back and give that pertinent piece of advice that will change everything. I think that you miss out on so much of the lessons. I don't think I'd give her any advice. I think I'd let her fuck up again and again and again. Because without those fuck ups, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think I would just let it all play out exactly as it did. It all needed to happen for me to become this version of myself.
So what's the purpose now? It's bigger. I can see that.
I just want to share. Honestly, I just want to share with people what I've discovered, that life can feel good. Life can feel good. It can feel expansive. We all have a purpose. We all have a reason to be here. And when you are living that purpose, the feelings of power and significance, it just creates such an energy and such a vibration and it creates so much beautiful just space in your body. It just feels so good. Like humans, we can feel so good. I had never felt joy. I'd never felt joy before I started this journey. And now I feel joy nearly every day. It's not what we think it is, this live-in business. It doesn't need to be stressful. We shouldn't, all these shoulds that we have, I should do this, I should do that, like, fuck all of that. Do what feels good. That has been a mantra for me this year. Do what feels good. And anytime I feel lost and I get back into the human experience, and it happens often, that's what I come back to. Do what feels good. What feels good in this moment. And that's how I've learned to love myself. And I love myself through beautiful nutrition, which does not mean depriving myself either. I love myself through movement, moving my body. I love myself through breath, intentional breathing. I love myself in 1,000 different ways every single day. And I feel so good in my body so much of the time. And I just want people to know, like, you can have this too. This is the foundation. Don't build anything until you have this. Because from this place, there's so much clarity. There's so much clarity. And that's the next part for me, like bringing those ideas into fruition, birthing the many creative ideas that I still have, the dreams I have inside of me, birthing them again.
And how's creativity going to play a role in this version of you going forward?
Everything I do is creative. Like, I don't call myself a photographer or a writer or an influencer. I don't put labels on myself anymore. Those are just all things that I do because I am creative, and everybody is creative. I remember before I even felt comfortable calling myself a creative person, I was a fucking chef and then a photographer. Like, I feel like there's a lot of people out there in the world that do not consider themselves creatives. Maybe some of them are listening to this podcast, but at the end of the day, like every human being on this planet, we are born creators. We are creators. So take creativity into everything. I have many creative ideas. I love to write. I still love to take pictures. I've created a guided journaling practice. That's going to be my first business launch this year. It's a tool that I've used myself the last 12 months to help me break certain patterns, identify and put awareness over certain patterns so that I can break them, like really intentionally create the life that I want. Fucking sick of doing it subconsciously. Like, look at all these fucking mistakes that I've made, and you've seen every single time I get myself in the same situation, a time comes where you have to say, where's this coming from? Enough. And I've gotten to that point.
One last thing before we wrap up. You've just mentioned this, and I feel like this is an important part of this conversation, and that's identity. So photographers call themselves photographers, videographers call themselves videographers, there's filmmakers, there's writers, there's graphic designers. They're all an identity that we assume to ourselves. Even a creator or a creative is an identity that we choose to live by. What transition of identities have you been through in each stage of the story that you've just shared?
I've been Australia's first professional Instagrammer. I've been a chef. I've been a photographer. I've been a business owner. I've been a managing director. I still remember after Phoenix had wrapped up and it was clear that none of my business ideas were going anywhere at that point, going to a social event and not knowing how to introduce myself. And, obviously being a mum now, like that's a very strong, for a lot of people, that becomes a very, very strong pillar of their identity. But even that, I don't feel right with any of it, to be honest. when people ask me what I do, they just want to put me in a box. They just want to understand. Like, that's what we do as humans, right? We just want to make meaning out of everything.
Yep.
But I just am who I am. I'm just Lauren. I'm just me. I create things. I do things.
And embodying this identity of Lauren that encapsulates, I almost picture it like just a vortex of bringing all these identities together into one. How are you feeling about that now? That if you went somewhere, you introduced yourself, you said, "Hi, I'm Lauren."
That's what I do.
Yeah.
And then
How are
inevitably,
you embracing that?
it just feels good. It just feels really clear. Like, my ego does not need people to understand me or think that I'm important. It's so interesting. There's such an interesting rabbit hole we could go down. I used to always be the center of attention, being Australia's first professional Instagrammer and running events, and everyone would come up and want to talk to me. And God, my ego just loved it because I sought validation from external sources. And now I don't give a fuck. Like, there's so much solidity and certainty inside of me that I don't care if somebody looks right past me and doesn't even want to talk to me because I don't wear makeup or I'm wearing jeans or, they don't perceive me as a successful person. Like, I actually don't care. I have no attachment to that whatsoever. I'd rather fly under the radar because I just feel so complete. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's been a really distinct shift for me. My sense of self does not come externally anymore. My sense of self is very solid. It's very internal. I'm a complete person. I feel whole.
And you've touched on ego. There's been a lot of times, you just said it, that you've been the center of attention. You've started groups that attracted the people that wanted you to be the center of attention. Through all of that, what were the highs and lows of the young Lauren's ego that would have to keep getting refilled?
I think, it's so interesting with social media as well, because obviously this was happening with my events and with my business offerings, but on a grander scale, this has been happening on social media since I first downloaded Instagram and put it on my phone, in that there's a sense of I'm worthy. The more followers I have, the more likes I get, the more comments, the more direct messages I have. And from my peak, which was, I remember the number, 466,000 Instagram followers, I believe I've dropped about 100,000 since that time. And, my content gets a fraction, like 1/20th of the engagement that it used to. DMs get a lot less traction. Back then, losing 1,000 followers on Instagram, because you just see the number for 1,000 when you've got such high numbers as me. It'll go from like 67 to 66, right? I could lose a day fretting over that. Like, I could really let that, people don't care about me anymore. Like, there was a huge story for a while there, like, I'm not relevant anymore. I've had my day. Like, I'm a has-been. That really played out a lot, especially during this last 2 years when I've been waiting for the creative spark to strike and not wanting to force it. Like, at no point was I willing to force it, but there were times where I was like, is it actually going to come back? Do some breath work. Yep. Fucking back to center, back to spirit. Yes. Oh yes. Trust. Okay. Cool. But actually, is it going to come back? Like, there were definitely times, but through all of that, I can honestly say, like, I just don't care. I don't care. I don't need people to care about what I'm doing or follow me or give me engagement or send me a DM. Like, other people's perspectives of me don't matter. I have a responsibility to show up in the world fully expressed and share myself and be seen as who I am. And there's a ripple effect in that. And the right people will find me. And maybe they'll buy something off me when I have something to sell. But maybe I'll just say something. And this has happened all through my career. I've said one thing and this person has changed their life because of it. One thing taken to heart. Like, the world needs more fully expressed people who know themselves and are willing to put themselves out there, because it gives permission to others to do the same thing. And if everybody could be out in the world, open, vulnerable, knowing themselves, internally motivated, we would live in a very, very different world. A very different world. So that's all I can do. And not be attached to the outcome. Just get out there, be myself, do the stuff that sparks joy in me. Let there be a ripple effect. If there's not, I don't care. I'm just living my best life over here. Like, sunrise is free, swim in the ocean is free, all of the things that give me such joy every day. I don't need an Instagram follower or a sale in order to give me those things and give me that feeling and that sense of safety inside my body that I have now.
Yeah. To the person who is looking at the numbers of their TikTok, their Instagram, their YouTube channel, who's looking at it and still in that place of, okay, well, I'm at 10,500. It's dropped to 10,400. Oh my God, the end of my life is here. This is just devastating. What are you going to say to them?
You know, it's such a journey. It's so funny. When I first came in here to do this recording, I was reading a magazine that was just left on the table. And it had all these like very cliche, heard it all before motivational quotes. Like one page I was reading was about habit stacking, like, you know, find another habit that you have and stack a new habit onto that. Like, we know all of this. Like, I could give you the perfect words to not worry about that 100 loss of followers. But if you're not ready to receive that message, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to help. These changes happen inside of your body, not in your mind. They can't be intellectualized. So I would still say, like, re-listen to what I said about my journey and how I've stopped caring. And there might be a little nugget there for you, like you might be ready to have that lesson. But overall, like, the biggest piece of advice that I received during, you know, the last difficult couple of years for me that I continue to come back to is just get in your body. Get in your body, get in your body. Like, everything about the human experience is about being in your body and feeling it, like feeling the pain of losing that 100 followers. Like, that hurts. I get it. Like, it hurts. Let it hurt, but don't let it hurt for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
You know, don't let it hurt into an old cycle or a thought pattern or a spiral or something that's going to keep you feeling unworthy or less than or incomplete or broken, because it's got nothing to do with you. So keep coming back to yourself, because when you are in yourself, you could lose every follower. You could lose your home. You could lose everything. You could lose people closest to you, but you'll still find yourself.
Lauren, I've enjoyed our conversation. It's been a long time since we had a conversation like this.
Yeah,
this time it's recorded.
Probably some new levels this one too.
This is a very different one, but I appreciate what you've shared, your openness, your vulnerability, because what you've shared and the journey you've been on is what's going to help the person who's watching this to move through their struggles, time of burnout, and what to do next for themselves.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to get together.
Yeah, it is.
If you like what we're doing here and you want to support us, then click that subscribe button down below. And if you do that, my commitment to you is that the team and I will continue making videos to help you as a creator. If there's another creator who you think might need to hear the message in this video, then you can help us help them by sharing this episode with them.